Hello and welcome to another video from Another Knitted Thing. Today we are going to be looking into 5 different pocket ideas, all made on the hand knit machine in 15 minutes. So it's going to be very brief and very quick, but I'm going to try and get through all the information that you need to know. The first is the partial knit pocket. So this is a very subtle pocket. There's no pocket placket at the top. And this is done through partially knitting that pocket bag in the area that you want it to be. So I've brought in to hold the needles on the left and the right hand side of my main fabric. And I'm only going to be knitting in that center bit, which is where I want the pocket to be. I've changed color to make it really quite visible so you can see the pocket bag as it is made. And I'm just going to knit double the length that I want that pocket bag to be because I'm knitting both sides. Partially knitting in only that area in the middle of my sample. At the halfway point, I will increase my stitch size to the largest stitch size that I can before returning it. And that just makes that fabric fold a little bit better when you get to the halfway point, so it doesn't create as much bulk in your garment or where you want that pocket to be. And then once I have got to the length of the pocket bag that I want this to be, I'm just going to add some weights, change back to my main colour yarn, which is this turquoise, and knit all the way across, reintroducing all of the needles and continue knitting the length of my sample, or you would be knitting your garment panel. So once I've done that, I'm going to cast off, and this is the pocket. So you can see that where the pocket bag begins, that would fold up and it would lie along the same position as the back. And on the back side, there would then be the pocket bag. And we just need to join up the two sides of this pocket bag. So I'm rehanging this back up onto the machine. There are several ways you can do this, whether you want to hand sew them together. You should use a crochet hook or a latch tool. I prefer to put them back onto the needles or use a linker because then that gives a really nice even edge rather than doing it by hand, which sometimes can get a bit tight. Depends on your hand sewing skills, to be fair. I'm lazy, so I like to use a machine or a linker rather than doing it by hand. And then once they are joined together, you have your pocket bag. So this is the only sample where you'll make an actual bag. The rest of the samples that we'll be going through, you will just make a flap and then that will be joined onto the main part of your material to then create the pocket bag. Whereas this one, you actually have the pocket bag itself. So then once I've rehung all of the two sides back onto the needles, I'm then just going to use a latch tool and bind off, and you want to do that on both sides, and then your pocket is complete, and you just need to give it a really nice steam and kind of make sure that that top edge sits nice and flush against the garment. The second pocket we will look into is the rib pocket. So this just has a little bit of rib detail at the top of the placket, and this is going to also be done with a little bit of partial knit, and that partial knit is just to kind of give note of where I want that pocket to begin. And it's also going to mean that we're going to rehang these stitches back onto the machine to work with them later on. So here I have moved the needles on both the left and the right hand side that I do not want to use as in the pocket into the hold position, and I've changed onto a waste yarn, and I'm just going to knit 4 rows in the central area here with waste yarn, so that those stitches are placed onto a holder, essentially. That's what I'm going to be using them for. I'm then going to change back into my main colour before knitting all the way across. So I've got my main colour and I'm going to knit all the way across and continue this sample size, or what would be the garment shape, until you get to the point where you will then cast off. So now I'll cast off this sample. Again, you would do the shaping if you had the shaping for the garment piece, whether it's the front and you do the neckline or the armholes, etc. So you can now see that after I have cast off this area in the center, which is where I have my waste yarn, this is where I'm going to work from. So this bottom row of stitches here, that is going to make the pocket placket. So I'll rehang those and knit up the pocket placket. And this top row, that I will then rehang and make the pocket bag itself. So I'm going to start with the pocket bag, and I'm going to find that row of the main colour, and I'm going to rehang those back onto the machine. So each stitch will have a needle, and I'm going to hook all of these back onto the machine and work with them. I'm going to knit down with the pink yarn and that will produce the pocket bag itself. So my swatch up until this point, I have knitted 36 rows, and now I have knitted 30 rows, and I'm going to rejoin this onto the main part of the fabric. So because I've knitted 30 rows for the pocket bag, I'm going to count up from the bottom 6 rows, because that section is 36, and rehang that row back onto the machine. So this is because then I'm going to make that pocket bag sit nice and flush against the main material of the garment, or in this case the sample, and then I'm going to cast off. So this just means that I have one less seam that I need to hand sew, because I'm a bit lazy. I prefer to do things on the machine if I can, rather than hand sew it. And so you can see here, this is the pocket bag. So now I'm going to turn it around and we're going to do the placket. So I'm going to cut up against the last row that I've done of the waist yarn, and now again rehang these onto the machine. So I'm always rehanging in the same sort of way that I would knit. So the front of the fabric is facing away from me and the back of the fabric is facing towards me. And once they are all rehung onto the needles, I will then get rid of that waist yarn. So the waist yarn is just to keep those stitches there, and it means that I can then work from them and knit from them afterwards. So you can see that's the pocket bag where I've continued knitting after rehanging. And I'll just take away this waist yarn. And this will be then a rib structure that I will make, because this is the rib pocket. And I'm going to match the rib section that I have at the bottom of this sample. So I will bring up the ribber bed attachment. If you don't have a ribber bed attachment, then you can use the latch tool to drop the stitches down and then reform them into a rib structure. But if you have a ribber attachment, as I do, I'm then just going to transfer all of the needles into a 2x2 rib structure. It can be a 1x1 or a 4x4 or whatever rib structure that you want to do. And I will then put on the pink yarn, knit 10 rows of the rib structure before transferring all of the stitches to the back bed, and then cast off. So I shall now cast off. But like I say, you don't have to do a 2x2 rib structure. You can do any rib structure you like. And you can see now that that is the pocket placket. So those two edges need to be sewn down, as do the two sides of the pocket bag. Next is the Picot Pocket. So this is done in exactly the same way as the rib pocket. We just have a little picot detail at the top. So I'm going to skip forward right until this picot detail, because the rest is exactly the same as the rib pocket. So if you want to do this one, just go back a couple of minutes and follow the rib structure. But now we have rehung those stitches for the picot edge for that placket, and I'm transferring every other stitch onto the needle next door, all the way across the needle bed, and then keeping those needles in the working position, I'm going to knit 2 rows, and that has reintroduced stitches onto the empty needles, and then I will continue knitting that placket to get to the point where I'm then going to fold it in half to kind of create this folded edge. Once that's done, I'm going to rehang all of the stitches of that last row of my main fabric back onto the needles. So this is then folding that little picot detail in half to create a nice little top edge. And then I will cast off. So this whole process is done exactly the same way. Creating that pocket bag is exactly the same as that rib structure. This is just a little detail change at the top for the placket that you can then try out yourself if you would like. You don't have to do picot if you don't want to. You can just do a bit of plain knitting at the top if you wanted a different detail. You can put some lace details in there. That is all up to you. This is just 2 different suggestions that I have come up with for this little video and for my Patreon technical sheet as well. So I'll take it off the machine, and you will see that it will need a really, really good steam to get that pocket placket lying flat, but both sides of that pocket placket will need to be sewn down onto the main area of the sample or the garment, and also the pocket bag as well. The next is the seamless pocket. So this I think is my favorite, and that's because it requires no sewing. Everything is done on the machine. There's a few extra details and steps to it though. And for one, I'm going to start right after this rib section. So I have knitted my rib and I'm going to mark on my main fabric where I want that pocket bag to be. So you can tell that I'm talking to the camera to try and remind myself from some details of what I need to mention. But I have then changed over onto my main yarn and I'm going to knit 6 rows because I'm always working with 36 rows up until the pocket bag where it starts. And I have that pocket bag finishing 6 rows before the rib. I then have some waste yarn and I'm going to count 15 needles into my sample because this is where I want my pocket to be. And I'm just going to mark these stitches with this waste yarn. So on either side of where I want that pocket bag to sit, I'm just marking those stitches so I know the exact stitches that I need to pick up at the end, and then I'm going to continue on knitting. So I'm knitting the whole garment front or the piece before I then come and work the pocket bag. So now I'm going to find where I placed those stitch markers previously, and I'm going to rehang those stitches onto the machine. So I'm coming up from the front of the fabric and putting those onto the machine rather than the back. And I'm going to find each side as I've done here. So both stitch markers and rehang those. And then I'm going to rehang the little bar, the horizontal bar in between each of the stitches along the rest of that row. So it can be a little bit tricky. Take your time with this because it's very easy to get the wrong part or it's very easy to get it wonky. If you wanted to sew a thread through this row to begin with, that could be a better marker than just trying to find the right row, as I have done. So now that I have done my first row in the pink, on either side, I'm going to come in to the knit and find that exact horizontal bar of the ones that I hooked up before, and I'm going to hang that back up onto the end needles, and I'm going to do that on the left hand side and also on the right hand side as well. So now I'm essentially just hooking up that main bit of fabric or that main garment piece back up onto the machine before every single row. So I'm making that pocket bag simultaneously as joining it to my sample piece or to the garment piece. So I'm using every single horizontal bar of those stitches, and I'm also going to reset my row counter because then I know exactly how many rows up I've knitted for that pocket bag, unless you're good at counting in your head at the same time as picking up stitches, which I'm not great at multitasking, so I'll just let the row counter do it for me. And I will do this every row until I get to the end of the sample. So I mentioned Patreon. I put some technical sheets up on Patreon. So if you want to go and subscribe to that, you can follow the link below. Otherwise, I'm on Instagram and you can like, comment and subscribe to YouTube for some more videos such as this one, which I bring out every so often. So that is my little marketing for myself. And now I'm going in and making my partially knitted top bit. So this is 2 stitches out every row and then reintroducing them back in again. This is just a little detail that I kind of made up because I thought it could be quite interesting. And then I'm rehanging that original row back on, so I'm kind of folding it in half and then I will cast off. If you wanted to do a rib placket at the top, if you wanted to do a picot placket at the top, you can do whatever you want. This was just a little bit of a detail that I thought could be quite interesting to play with. And once it's off the machine, I will turn it around so you can see what I mean by the partially knitted kind of curve. So there it is, and that's 2 needles out every row. It just needs a good steam, but there is no sewing up needed for this one. It's nice and neat. It's very easy. And finally, we have the patch pocket. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about this because let's be honest, do I need to? It is just basically knitting that first section of my sample or your garment piece. I will note that I have put some stitch markers on the back so I know where I want my patch pocket to sit. And then I will go ahead and knit my patch pocket. So this is just a sample that I added some stripes to make it a little bit more interesting. And I will then get a needle and thread and I will sew it on. I'm going to be very honest, I didn't exactly do that because I'm very lazy and I couldn't be bothered. You can use a linker, a crochet hook, or just sewing it with a needle. This is with the needle, and you can see that I didn't finish it because, well, yeah. So there we have it. That is 5 different pockets in 15 minutes. Hope you enjoy the video. If you want more content like this, then you know where to find me. Any comments, I will get back to you. But thank you for watching and happy knitting.